Now this wonderful drawing shows the layout of Bexhill West Station at the point of its opening in June 1902. And if we zoom in, we can see on the drawing there are two signal cabins, box number 1 and box number 2. Now the reason there were two, I think there's probably many reasons for it, but the main ones are that the number 1 cabin, which was the main signal box, which had 123 levers, was out of sight of the point work around the station itself, at the platforms down by the concourse. And also there were limits at the time of the length of point rodding that you could have, which I believe at the time was 200 yards. So hence I think that's the reason why there are two cabins. Now today's video is concentrating on cabin number 2, but it's worth just having a quick look at this and see the vast amount of signals that were installed at the point of the railway opening in 1902. Now I don't intend to model all of those, it would take me forever, but I do want the whole setup to be sort of fairly realistic in its operation, and it would be nice if people could use this model when it's all built in much the same way as the real railway would have run. So I want the point work and everything to be controlled sort of realistically, and I'd like the control gear for doing so to also be as realistic as I can make it. So with compromise in mind and a need to reduce the amount of signalling and the amount of work that I'm going to have to do, whilst trying to keep it as realistic as possible, I'm going to go with this diagram for box number 2. Now I believe this was the layout in the 1940s and it stayed like this until the mid-50s. If we have a look at this diagram, we can see the numbers on it relate to the levers in the box and what they controlled. So what I've done is basically traced this drawing to produce a little control panel, or a signal box diagram if you like, which will go for my little control panel, which will control just the station area. Now by this point, this signal box, the block instrument's been removed and it's literally just a lever frame. So that's what I'm going to do. There'll be no block instrument with this box, but when we get to box number 1, well of course we'll have to include that. Anyway, that's the diagram I'm going to go with, and it's important for me to suss this out because I need to know how many levers I'm going to incorporate in my own version. I'm going to simplify this a little bit, and I've simplified it down to 8 levers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in part 2 of this video, which will be come out in a couple of weeks' time. Now as I was looking into all of this, I came across this etch of parts from the Scaleforce Society, and this makes it into a truly wonderful little lever frame, with the advantage that you can add mechanical locking to it as well. So really this video is all about putting one of these things together and seeing what's involved with it. Now I'll say right up front, I used a really cheap soldering irons, nothing special. I've used some Slater's 9% phosphoric acid flux, and I think I used a 145 degree solder, and that's about all I used. I also used some emery boards and a pair of little cutters just to cut the bits out of the fret. That's pretty much all I used to do it, so let's get straight onto it. Now I use this handy bending tool simply because I had it. It wasn't really necessary. The half-etched lines on the fret make it really easy to bend. I could have easily bent this just around a piece of wood or in a simple vise. However, it does do a nice job. And there we go. So once the folds have been made, it's necessary to solder the joints just to reinforce them. And what I've done, I've fluxed this and I'm just running the solder on now with the tip of my soldering iron. Now, really could have done with a slightly more powerful iron for this, but it's got the job done. It's okay. You can see here how easy this is to bend. It's really not that difficult at all, quite straightforward. So the next challenge here is to form this plate into a curved form, and this is really easy. I've just used a piece of soft foam, bit of broom handle, a little bit of elbow grease, although I'm really not pressing hard. I've sped this up and it looks as though I'm pressing much harder than I actually am. And that bend comes in really quite easily. I think it's a good idea to do a few little test fits just to check that the curve is going where we want it to. Nearly there. Not bad. So at this point I've already put some little tacks in just to sort of hold it in place, and I'm got it upside down and putting a bit of pressure on just to help form that curve nice and tight. Now make this look a lot more awkward than it really needed to be, and this really was trying to get it on camera, and I'd rather, I think, have come in with the soldering iron from the side, but that seemed to obliterate things a little bit on the camera, so it looks as though I've made a bit of a fist of that, but it's not too bad. I think if I had a slightly more powerful iron here and a bigger tip, it would help to do this much more easily. You can see it's worked, and as I say earlier, it's a cheap soldering iron, so it really isn't necessary to have expensive gear to produce this sort of thing. Now this is the bracket that sits at the base of the frame, and through those little lugs that stick up we'll pass a little bar, a little shaft, onto which all the levers pivot. Now the curved plate on the top of the frame is called the Quadrant top, And these little strips are the Quadrant rubbing strips, and that's our next job to fit. So these are formed from little pieces of etch, and I've curved these around the little bottle that you can see behind the frame. It's an old flux bottle, and I put some thinners in it. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's what I use to form the curve. Now once these things have been curved and the ends bent over at 90 degrees, they just clip on. It's a really elegant piece of design, this. You sort of press them in place and they snap where they need to go. Now to fit those, I sweated them on with heat from the soldering iron, and that's how I did the others that you can see. But then I remembered I had a resistance soldering unit, and I thought, well, I'll try that. So I sort of rigged it up. Could have done a better job. It would have been better to bolt or clamp the earth lead to the frame itself. But what I'm doing here, I'm controlling this probe with a foot pedal, and as I put my foot down, so it heats up. So I'm not applying heat all the time that probe is touching the work. It's just kind of touch the pedal, it heats up a bit like a spot welder, I guess. So a little bit of heat, move it along, a little bit more heat, move it along. It's such a useful tool. I'd probably be better off using it for all the soldering, but anyway, there we go. A little bit of cleanup to do on this. Now I'm going to save all the cleanup really till once I've got it all assembled and I know it's all working a treat. Then I'll strip it all down and polish this up properly before it's painted. So I've got the final lever to assemble here, and the levers themselves are formed from 3 laminations of the etch. Now the instructions give very clear guidance on how to make a nice little jig to assemble these things, and it occurred to me that the frame itself is quite a useful jig, so I've dropped these 3 laminations into the frame, and here I'm pushing that cross shaft through to locate them. And these things will be joined with solder. You'll see this in just a moment. So having got that assembled in there, I've used a clothes peg to sort of hold it together. A little bit of flux. And I'm going to put some solder tacks onto this piece, just to hold it all in sort of one piece, and then I'll take the lever out of the frame and continue the soldering all the way round. Now you see the solder looks quite rough. You can see the other 4 levers that I've previously done. I've given those a bit of a clean up. There's still some more work to do on them, but you kind of see how they're going to look. So put another little tack on the back here before I take the thing out and solder it completely. Now for things like this, I like to use an emery board to clean everything up. I don't want to spoil a nice Swiss file by gumming it up with solder. So an emery board, fine, it's cheap, it's disposable. And for this first quick clean-up, it's just the job. So I've sped this up quite a bit here, but it really didn't take long, so 2 or 3 minutes, I guess. And all the solder was cleaned up and the part looked reasonably presentable. and into the frame for a quick test. So what you see here are two of the catches. Now this is a really elegant little mechanism, really well designed, and there's a sort of a little reverse bend to it on the top. And I'm just tinning, putting a couple of little spots of solder on here, and this will be bent round around a nickel silver pin. And you'll see this in just a second. Sorry about the lack of focus. Now I experimented with lots of different ways of doing this. I think each catch I made I used a slightly different technique, and this was the last one that I did. And I'm not suggesting that this is the best method, but this was the only one I filmed. So there you go, see I've bent that around, and now I'm just going to get a pair of pliers just to sort of crimp that join a little bit. Now all the others I soldered with the soldering iron, but this one I remembered the resistance soldering unit and thought, well, we'll try that. So give this a little bit of flux. I've got the earth lead under my finger there, and I'm just going to bring the probe in and apply a little bit of heat. Now I'm not heating this all the time that probe is on there, it only has a little blast. Even so, I think I've overheated this one a little bit. But there you go, that's quite a nice, neat little job. And I'll give it a quick preliminary clean up. So now we're into the exciting bit where it all starts to come together, and I've previously assembled this catch handle, and again this is a clever piece of design in that catch assembly that you saw me make just now just pops in and the whole thing folds up and forms quite an elegant little hinge joint. Little squeeze with the pliers. Some more excellent filming here, I do apologise. It isn't always easy to, when you're working, to sort of remember where the camera's pointing, but there we go. Now I've got a tiny piece of tube here, and I'm just pushing the piece of tube through as a pin. And I'm in two minds with this. Part of me thinks that when I do the final assembly, and this is only sort of I'm just sort of putting it together here, but I may flare the ends of the tube out to form a kind of a riveted joint, or I might put some little nut and bolt in there, we'll see. And that little hook that I'm bending on the end there takes the spring, which you'll see in just a moment. So with the spring fitted, the action of the thing is really quite pleasing. You can see it working there, but it can ride out from the lever. So to prevent that, it's a little catch box. I've got this handy little drill here that's controlled with a foot pedal. I'll just open up the holes. The catch box slides into place like so, and I should just sort of crimp it on a little bit with the pliers. But those holes you saw me open up there, they're going to take a little wire pin and for now that's going to hold it all together so I could test it out. Now as I put this thing together, I really have been impressed with the design of it. It's a real joy, especially popping the lever in, the assembled lever. Just slides into place, that cross shaft. I'm pushing that through again. Just locate it at the bottom, then we can test it out. The catch drops into the little notches on either side of the quadrant top. Each lever is working smoothly, and when they're locked in place they're really quite robust. Very pleased with that. And so here it is in all its glory. In part 2 I shall fettle, finesse, polish and paint the thing, and we'll look at adding switches to it to control the turnouts and signals, and we'll also get into how I will manage to get the mechanical release to work from the second signal box. But there you go, that's been a fun little project to put together. I've enjoyed that, and I'm looking forward to getting on with the work for part 2. So thank you all very much for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you all again next time. Cheerio.